All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out. Tonight we have Julianne Zimmerman from Reinventure Capital, and we will be moderated by Layla Storcam. So before we get started, just to plug our application, I'll put it in the chat. Oh, I don't have the link anymore. The links, if someone has a link, you can put in the chat for the application. You can also scan the QR code. But that's happening now, and then we can go ahead and get started with Layla.
Hi, my name is Layla. I'm a third-year politics, philosophy, and economics student at Northeastern University. This has been my second semester doing NU Impact. Last semester, I was a junior investment analyst for the education and financial services vertical, and this semester, I've been the senior analyst for the same vertical.
So I'll introduce myself. I'm Julianne Zimmerman. I am a managing director with Reinventure Capital here in the Boston area. Reinventure is a high impact, high return investment practice. We invest exclusively in US-based companies led and controlled by BIPOC and/or female identifying founders at break even and poised to grow profitably. And I'm delighted to be here with you all this evening.
Awesome. So to start it off, what does it mean that Reinventure Capital is a third reconstruction investment practice?
Sure. So that phrase, third reconstruction, really refers to the history you see represented visually on our landing page. The first reconstruction in the United States was really about the abolition of slavery and thereby the legal freedom, the physical bodily freedom of all Americans. The specific freedom of Black Americans especially. And the second reconstruction was in the form of the civil rights era, in which we saw an elaboration of that bodily freedom to political freedom and the rights of all Americans, again, especially particularly African Americans, to have access to the commons, to education and polling and all of the civic activities of American citizens. The third reconstruction is really economic freedom and the full ability of all Americans, again, especially Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, to participate without restriction or limitation equally in the economic activity of our nation. And so when we are focused on the third reconstruction, we are investing specifically, as I said, in companies that are led and controlled by BIPOC and/or female identifying founders as a mechanism, as a lever of using the tools of finance to create a more equitable society and to create wealth and opportunity by and with and for and through those founders who are currently significantly sidelined by the finance sector and by venture capital in particular.
Yeah, and with this focus in mind, do you mind elaborating more on how Reinventure Capital has impacted the VC space?
Sure. So we're really at the outset of the Reinventure Capital Impact Legacy. This is a new fund, and we are actively investing the first portfolio for this fund. So we are, I hope, at the really the very, very threshold of the legacy of the Reinventure investment strategy. That said, we see our impact happening through essentially three mechanisms. The first is, of course, the investment. So investing in those companies that, as I said, create wealth and opportunity. The second is by collaborating and joining forces with and amplifying the work of our peers, because we're not alone in doing this work. And there are over 200 at this point funds with related or adjacent strategies. So maybe they focus exclusively on Black founders, or maybe they focus exclusively on Latinx founders, or maybe they focus exclusively on women, or maybe they focus at a different stage than we focus, or in a particular geography or a particular sector. So there are lots and lots of different strategies and approaches, and it's very important to us to play an active role in really amplifying and accelerating the growth of that community. We refer to that as knitting together the ecosystem. So finding ways to make connections with other managers, to share deals, to help founders connect with different managers, to raise the profile for other managers and celebrate their successes. And then the third is really a broader thought leadership effort. And so really making a very concerted effort to debunk some of the persistent misperceptions and fallacies that are really, really widespread in the venture sector, to engage with LPs, limited partners, the people who invest in funds like ours, to really share the opportunities and the advantages that are available to people who are or by the way, meaning individual family offices or institutional entities, but people who are prepared to invest in these underestimated, overlooked, undervalued opportunities. And by doing all of those things, we see ourselves as playing a significant role well beyond the size of our fund itself. And we hope very much to attract many more participants and much, much more capital to the field.
It's really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing at Reinventure Capital. And we're wondering, like, how has your background and maybe past experiences led you to the position you're in now?
Very indirectly. So there's widely understood to be a kind of pathway to venture capital, and that typically involves a stint at an investment bank, or possibly several internships at venture firms, or possibly a successful experience as a founder. So founding a company, growing it up, and selling it, or having an IPO, and then becoming a venture capital partner thereafter. But I came to this by a completely different path. And the really interesting thing is, when you look at the other fund managers who are pursuing these, what we consider to be third reconstruction investment strategies, even if they don't use that language, many of them also came from completely other backgrounds. So I started off as an aerospace engineer, and first 14 years of my working life, I had a great career as an engineer, building research apparatus for scientists all over the world to do their experiments in space and in simulation environments. And I learned a tremendous amount in that first career about solving problems and finding compelling opportunities to create solutions that, generally speaking, most of our peers thought were impossible. That background and that perspective, that experiential knowing that what everybody thinks is impossible is not necessarily actually impossible. That really is fundamental to what I do now. In between, so at the end of that, I was a finalist twice in the NASA astronaut selection process, and I had aspired to be an astronaut. So being a finalist was a signal honor and a fantastic experience. And also not being selected was a very, very severe disappointment. It was a big blow. Um, and and it also gave me an opportunity to think about what else I would care about as much as serving the global science community through a long process of, sort of inner exploration and outer exploration with my network both. I ended up co-founding a clean energy company in the early 2000s. And this is before the clean tech era. So again, this is something that we were told by everyone we talked to was impossible. I was called a hippie and a communist, and I was told nobody in their right mind will ever invest in clean energy and all sorts of other things that people sincerely believed at the time. And fortunately, it turned out they were wrong. And we now have a whole clean tech meta industry, several clean tech industries, actually, all under one sort of very messy, big umbrella. And similarly, I got involved with several other young growing companies who, again, were doing things that they were told were just simply impossible, and which proved not to be impossible at all. And over that several years experience, I ended up becoming a mentor and a competition judge and a grant reviewer and an advisor and consultant and board member and sometimes early team member to many, many, many companies. And over that experience, that exposure, I ended up, much to my own surprise, forming my own investment thesis. I saw opportunities for investment that I kept telling to people I knew well and I knew were smart and ethical and very prudent and diligent investors. And they would just look at me sideways, sort of, and say, well, I don't think so. And after doing that for a few years, I decided, well, I might as well just prove it myself. And so I found a co-founder and raised just a couple $1 million and made 4 investments, seed stage investments in 2013, 2014. And just as I was kind of coming to the end of that little demonstration exercise, my now senior partner, Ed Duggar, who is a titan, really one of the pioneers of impact investing, approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to join him to launch Reinventure. And so really the process for me was completely organic. I never set out to be a VC. It's not something I aspired to, but I found my way to it really as a way of solving problems and bringing forward solutions to things that other people just thought were intractable. And we still, in our conversations with people, encounter many, many folks who tell us that it's simply not possible to have a successful investment strategy focused on BIPOC and female founders. And we still hear people tell us it's not possible to have a successful investment strategy focused at the stage we do, companies that are at break even and poised to grow profitably. And we have people tell us all sorts of things are impossible. And we know they're not right. So, this is the work that I'm excited to be doing, and it's work that is valuable and worthwhile. And we see every day founders who are building amazing high value companies, and I'm just thrilled and honored to get to work with them.
So you've talked a bit about your investment strategy, and our fund is pretty similar in that our mission is to invest in impactful startups. So we were wondering, like, how does your investment process work? Like how you make the decision, how you
Yeah.
identify and select opportunities, and like what your due diligence process is like.
Yeah. So we are, so first of all, as I said, we are a high impact, high return strategy practice. And so we care very much about the returns. We care more, however, about making sure that we are investing in companies that are going to make great returns because of their impact. And so the beginning of a relationship with a founder team often happens when they are way upstream of an investment. We like to meet teams maybe around first revenues, keeping in mind that we don't invest until they're at break even or so. And so in those first couple of conversations, we try to get to know the founders, what they care about, what motivates them, what their individual and collective aspirations are, what their strategic impact objectives and priorities are, and we try to find ways to be helpful to them. And we've done that in a variety of ways. We've helped them to clarify their financial projections. We've helped them to connect with customers or board members or sometimes other early stage investors. We've helped them to understand term sheets they've received, a variety of things. And so the relationship really progresses from that point on, where we try to stay in contact with them to see how they are progressing and evolving, and again, trying to be helpful where we can along the way. When we get to the point of being aligned in terms of stage, by that time, we've already figured out if we're aligned in terms of impact, and whether we believe that the team in place really has the clarity and the wherewithal to be able to execute on that impact and financial strategy. And so then our due diligence goes much, much more into what you would consider to be conventional mode. So, we're very interested in talking to everybody on the team and to their key customers, and to, in some cases, as appropriate, it might be their suppliers or vendors. We want to make sure that we understand all of their legal agreements, and we want to make sure that those are all complete and appropriate and in place. We make sure that we look very deeply at their financial models, and very often we end up again offering them insights into how to clean up those models and improve on them. And of course, it's really important to us to make sure not only that we understand what has come up to that point, right, but also to have a really clear view with them about what the future of the company looks like. And so we revisit that conversation about strategic impact objectives and growth objectives, and even more importantly and more fundamentally, the individual and collective aspirations of the founder team. So we always ask how they will decide that this endeavor has been successful. What will convince them at the end of several more years of work on this particular company that that chunk of their lives was well spent and achieved what they hoped to achieve, recognizing that they could do just about anything else with that period of their lives and that commitment of their energy and attention. And so we really, really want to make sure that we have a very clear understanding and very clear alignment with that founder team. And then, of course, we also need to make sure that there's a syndicate of other investors who are interested in joining along. So meanwhile, we're having conversations with other investors as well about who's interested in being part of this raise. And so it becomes a very comprehensive set of conversations, centered, of course, around the business model and the financials, but really informed by those personal conversations with the founders about what they really, really care about.
And then how do you typically measure impact?
Yeah, that's another really important question. So for Reinventure, our core set of impact objectives are, as I've said, about creating wealth and opportunity. And so we, as part of our investment terms with our portfolio companies, we bake in a requirement and a commitment that the company will hire, promote, and compensate equitably as it grows at all levels from top to bottom. So from the board all the way down to the lowest paid employee, everyone in the company is hired, promoted, and compensated equitably. So no pay gaps, et cetera, living wages. And not only that, but they will also, to the extent possible, recognizing that in different sectors, it's not always practical, but to the extent possible, they will also source equitably. And so we also work with them to make sure that ownership of equity, the shares in the company, rests as much as possible with the founder team and is perfused as deeply as possible in the employees, so that everyone, as much as possible, gets to participate in the success of the company. So again, that creation of wealth and opportunity across all axes of the company. Then, because each of the founder teams we talk to, again, has their own strategic impact objectives, we formulate along with them measures that are defined according to those objectives. And so for a company that is in, say, fintech, those measures are going to be quite different from a company that's in, say, home healthcare, right? So the key for us is not that we have a predetermined or predefined set of measures for the companies. We have our own predefined measures for our objectives. For theirs, we want to make sure that we are baking in the appropriate measures for each of them.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you give us an example of a project or maybe a company you've invested in?
Sure. So I'll tell you about the first company in our portfolio. That's a company called Canela Media. And Canela is based in New York City. It's founded by a Latina who is a serial entrepreneur and also a very seasoned executive in the broadcast and media sectors. And Canela is really an answer to her lived experience and her observation in those sectors that in the US, we have a couple of really enormous behemoth companies focused on Spanish language audiences. And despite the fact that Hispanic, Latinx, and Spanish-speaking Americans are the most diverse, quote unquote, minority in the United States, those behemoth companies are really focused on one specific cultural reference set, and that's a part of Mexican culture. And so she wanted to create a media company that was fully representative of and speaking to and engaging with the full cultural diversity of the Hispanic, Latinx, and Spanish language audiences in the United States. And within a year of launching was already number 4 in audience reach for that audience, and has been growing very, very rapidly ever since. And there are a whole bunch of reasons why that is really important in terms of broader cultural impact. But really, we saw the Canella model as compelling, even without diving into all of those specific facets, just because we recognize that representation matters. And again, going back to our third Reconstruction framing, for all members of the Hispanic, Latinx, and Spanish-speaking audiences to recognize themselves and to be recognized by brands and advertisers and content creators is really important. So we were thrilled to invest in Canella as the first company in the Reinventure portfolio. And we were even more thrilled that the syndicate of investors in that round is all but one women or people of color or both. So we have one investor in that syndicate who is a white man. And when you look at the story that tells about an inversion of the usual, right, where typically everybody around the table is white men, and you might have one person representing another identity, we were really, really happy with the way that came together.
It's really awesome to hear about Canella. Representation is definitely super, super important. And kind of pivoting a bit, you mentioned earlier in this meeting that you have a lot of experience as a mentor. So do you have any tips or advice for students who want to enter like the impact investing or venture capital space?
Well, so first of all, I think that going back to the questions we ask our founders, I do get asked this question a lot. And my return question is always, well, what is your aspiration? What do you aim to achieve or accomplish in impact investing or in venture? And what will that success look like and mean for you personally? And the reason that's so important is because there are so many different ways to engage in impact investing. And there are so many different strategies and so many different firms and cultures within those firms and so many different possible pathways that your career could take, that really I think it makes very little sense to just start out without having a clear notion of what is going to be meaningful and rewarding to you. Because unfortunately, you can spend many years, working very, very, very hard to craft a career that is ultimately deeply unsatisfying. And it is a really hard, I don't even want to call it a sector. It's a really hard set of sectors. Impact investing includes a very wide spectrum of investing practices, and venture also is increasingly very wide field, let's say. And so it's complex, it's varied. There's not a single kind of path that is going to make sense necessarily, and it's super competitive, and it's really a very rough and tumble professional path to pursue. And so you really want to go in with a very clear idea of what your own aspirations and your own objectives and your own needs are, and what you're going to find gratifying. And then I just heard this outstanding piece of advice from my friend and colleague, Nora May Condena, just a couple days ago. And she said, recognizing, particularly if you're a woman or a person of color, or if you're a non-binary person, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't succeed. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to succeed, but it does mean that you are gonna also have a harder time than your straight white male peers. And it's hard for everybody, but it's especially hard if you're a woman or a person of color, or again, a non-binary person or whatever. And so, as she says, pack heavy. So that means, you know, prepare in advance. If you need to have a full-time job while you gain experience in venture or impact investing, do that. Take care of yourself. Build up your store of social capital with your network, so that you're able to sustain yourself in the inevitable grind and disappointments and frustrations and setbacks, because there are lots of them. And so just make sure that you are preparing yourself to be able to not just make it through, but to really thrive and be happy and fulfilled as you go, not just, you know, waiting for some ultimate, you know, eventual success. And absolutely, the other thing I would say is that because of all of the platforms that exist now to invest, even at very small amounts, I've seen opportunities to invest in crowd equity campaigns for as little as $10. I really encourage anybody who's interested in investing to just start forming your own investment strategy, your own investment thesis. Where do you see a particular point of view? Where do you see a particular set of opportunities? Where do you see advantages that maybe other people don't see? And just start pursuing that and gaining experience with that perspective and with your judgment, and use that to sharpen and evolve and iterate your interests. And yeah, I really want to both say, don't go in blithely, and also don't talk yourself out of it.
We really appreciate hearing your advice, especially as a woman of color myself, anticipating a career in finance and later on in impact investing. It's helpful to hear this. And then one last question before opening it up to everyone else for Q&A. How has the venture capital landscape changed in recent years as companies are increasingly placing an emphasis on impact and ESG?
So I think that's still very equivocal. Certainly, we've seen a lot more discussion, and we've seen a growing number of firms who have explicit impact or ESG or SDG or other kinds of framings that they bring to their investment strategy and their portfolio management. And also, you know, the particularly the venture sector is relatively slow to change, because, you know, we're talking about quite large funds that have a 10-year life, and most of the LPs, the limited partners in those funds, are institutional entities, and they tend to prefer to, you know, reinvest in successive funds from particular firms where they have invested in the past. And so what you see is that money doesn't shift very rapidly in the venture sector. And so I think, and I hope, that just like Reinventure is at the very, very dawn of its legacy of impact, the venture sector is really just at the threshold of beginning to make real change. But most of the change is really going to happen as a result of LPs reallocating capital or allocating capital in completely new ways and shifting money to funds that are specifically pursuing explicit impact or ESG or SDG or whatever kinds of strategies. And so actually, one way you could potentially have really significant system change kind of influence is to go work for an LP and be part of reframing the strategy and the manager selection and the allocation work that LPs are doing to begin to really shift money so that more strategies, more managers, more impact and SDG and ESG kinds of frameworks are actually fully allocated the capital necessary to fulfill those strategies.
Those are all the questions for me, but thank you so much for answering them. Wanted
Sure
to
thing.
open up to the audience now if anyone has any additional questions for Julianne.
I have a question. Thank you so much for coming today, and we're like so inspired by what you said. I have a kind of maybe a little more personal question. As a woman yourself in like a venture capital space, or like in any other experience you had before, like founders of company, or even like your engineering experience, is there any specific experience that you feel like you're undermined by male or like by other people of your ability just because you're a woman? Or is there any experience like that like make you want to enter this impact investing field for like BIPOC community?
Well, so I honestly, I don't know any women or people of color who haven't had those experiences. And I certainly have had many unacceptable interactions with people as an engineer, as a co-founder, as a seed stage investor, as now a VC. I can't say that that's really what made me want to start investing. It's certainly not what motivated me to start that seed stage practice. But I do think that your question is really very thoughtfully attuned, in that when Ed approached me and asked me to join him to launch Reinventure, I had no question whatsoever about the validity of the investment strategy, because I had experienced myself being dismissed or undermined or questioned in ways which clearly were only about my gender. And all of the founders of color I had ever worked with had had worse experiences than I had had. And so I knew that there were lots of people who had every reason to be considered quote unquote investable, who nevertheless had been passed over or dismissed or discouraged from pursuing their enterprises. And so, I can't say that I came into this with a kind of case to prove, but I did come into it knowing from my own experience and from the experience that many friends and colleagues and peers had shared with me, that that there was a huge amount of talent, a huge opportunity pool, a vast, robust, vibrant, varied, really vigorous opportunity to invest in companies with the potential to become not just high impact enterprises, but economic engines. And that really does motivate me. It motivates me every day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question too, separately from the previous question. I'm curious, what is the most difficult part of your role at Reinventure Capital, especially because, you know, it has like a unique investment thesis. Yeah, what would you say is the most challenging or the most difficult part about it?
So again, I think that's a really important question, and I'm going to probably give you what may sound like a kind of dodgy answer. I think that the hardest thing is just that it is really a brutal grind. I have only ever worked in fields that were pretty intense in terms of the workload and the intellectual challenge. And I am working harder now at Reinventure than I've ever worked before. And that's really because it matters so much to make sure that we are making the right decisions and that we are doing the best we can by all the founders we encounter. So our portfolio, when it's fully populated, will have 15 or 16 companies at the outside. We meet, or at least screen, about 150 companies a month. And we routinely have to say no to amazing, amazing founder teams, because that's just part of what we do. And so I want to make sure that in every conversation and every interaction that we have with founder teams, that we are giving them fair consideration and we are giving them a good no in most cases, and that we are giving them, at the very least, some useful kind of comment or feedback or something that enables them to, you know, go on to the next conversation with another investor, maybe better prepared or more confident or whatever it might be. And so, you know, that sense of obligation is it's both, as I said a moment ago, what motivates me every day, and also something that I really take to heart, and which means that it's a lot of work. I think the most difficult thing, separate from the hardest thing, the most difficult thing for me, honestly, is having conversations with LPs on a daily basis who ask the same questions every day about, you know, isn't investing in women and people of color just too high risk? How can you possibly find enough deal flow? Don't you have to do extra work to teach them how to operate their businesses? Don't you have to make special arrangements or provisions in order to, you know, select teams who wouldn't otherwise qualify for investment? Or aren't you lowering your standards in order to invest in founders of color and female founders? And hearing those same questions over and over every day, I have to say, is really dispiriting. And so I would say the most difficult thing, just being perfectly candid with you, is I have to make sure that I manage my own emotional state, because I can get very frustrated and angry, and my frustration and anger doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't help me make better decisions. It doesn't help me, be helpful to founders. It doesn't help me talk to LPs. It doesn't help me, and it doesn't help anybody else. And so I think that for me personally is the most difficult thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Julianne, thank you so much for spending an hour with us tonight. It's 8 o'clock, so I'm just going to wrap it up real quick. If anyone wants to check out our information, the QR code will lead you there. And also, this is our timeline for our applications. You can use, I'll go back for the QR code. This QR code for the application process. And yeah, I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you all very much. And I wish you all every possible success. And if I can be helpful to you, you're welcome to reach out to me. And if I can be helpful, I will.
Thank you so much, Julianne. This was incredible. I'm so jazzed. This was awesome talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.